seen any evidence yourself? Has the evidence been shared with you or other members, senior members of the President's staff, as to why he made this particular accusation?
As far as me, no, I'm not in a position that would be regularly part of my daily duties for the President to sit down and go through that. That's probably a level above my pay grade. But as I've mentioned, I think the President believes that the appropriate place for this to be adjudicated is for the House and Senate Intelligence Committees to have the clearances, the staff, the processes to go through this, look at it, and report back. Yeah.
Did he share it with?
I'm not going to get it. Look, as the President made very clear, Glenn, I'm not going to. As the President said in the statement that he issued on Sunday, we're not going to have further comment on this until this matter is resolved. Yes.
Two quick questions. So just to follow up on the follow-up. So does the White House feel that it's appropriate? You say that you want it to be adjudicated by the congressional committees,
right.
But the President made declarative statements
right.
on Twitter. So I guess is the White House position that the President can make declarative statements about a former president basically committing a crime, and then the congressional committee should look into that and basically prove it? I mean,
well, it's not a question. No, but I would take issue with. It's not a question of prove it. I think, as I said now 5 times to the follow-up, that it's not a question of prove it. It's that they have the resources and the clearances and the staff to fully and thoroughly and comprehensively investigate this, and then issue a report as to what their findings are.
So, but President Trump's Twitter statement shouldn't be taken at face value about what.
Sure, it should. Of course, I mean, what? No, there's nothing. As I mentioned to Jim, it's not that he's walking anything back or regretting. He's just saying that they have the appropriate venue and capabilities to review this. Margaret, I'm sorry.
On the Obamacare replacement, so you've said that it'll be in phases and that you're going to need additional legislation. So just to clarify, are the cost savings that you guys are projecting, is that dependent on phase 3 on the national competition plan?
Yeah, well, it's not dependent. I think that in order to see it fully come to fruition, yeah, you have to see all parts of it. But the way that it was passed doesn't allow for the way that it was passed is almost the same way that we're going through this now, which is they passed certain things, then the Secretary of Health and Human Services at the time was granted significant regulatory authority that allowed her to do certain things at the time to implement pieces of Obamacare that we now have to act backwards and go almost in the same steps to do what they did to lay it out. We've got to repeal it, and then we've got to replace it with the plan that's going to do the same. Certain things can be done in the same way and certain things can't. It literally depends on how that was done. John Frederick.
Sean, in the replacement plan, it says that the states that accepted the Medicare expansion money would continue to be funded. So what is the message you have to Republican state legislators that thought they were fiscally responsible in rejecting Medicaid expansion in their states, and now they didn't get the federal dollars on either end? What is your response?
I think what we need to do is to make sure, as the President said in his statements, as Secretary Price did, we've got to make sure that we continue to protect people through this transition process. Let the bill work its way. But this is the first time, as we address the Medicaid portion of this, this is probably the first time that we've really addressed an entitlement aspect of something in almost 30 years. So I think we've got to let this piece of it work its way through the House. But remember, one of the things that happened through the Medicaid expansion was the goal has always been of Medicaid to help people who were disabled or poor or met a specific number of criteria. For the first time in Obamacare, we expanded Obamacare, or the Obama administration did rather, to able-bodied individuals that in a way that had never been done before, and it was not a specific class. That's led largely to the ballooning cost. I think a lot of the reforms that will be contained in this bill will address that, but I think we've got to let it work its will through the process. Alexis.
I want to ask you 2 communications questions on 2 topics. Because the President gave himself a middling grade on communication, let me ask you about the experience that the previous administration had when Obamacare was going through its own phases. President Obama, said that the opposition to the legislation was able to seize the opportunity while it was being legislated to create public perceptions about what was in the legislation. So my question is on ACA, what is the president going to do to improve his communications, to be out there explaining what is in the bill, to work with lawmakers? That's the first question, and then I'll ask you the next one.
Okay, thank you. So on the first one, as I mentioned, he's had and continues to have significant outreach to members of Congress. He's talked to health insurers. I mean, I think we've read out a lot of the activities the last couple of weeks, and literally in just within an hour, he's going to sit down with the House Deputy Whip team to talk about the legislative piece of this in the House. So this is going to be a very aggressive, laser-like focus of this administration over the next month or two to get this thing through the House and then moved over to the Senate. But there's a big difference, Alexis. What we're doing is vastly different. We're expanding government, promising people something, and I think what's happened is there was a lot of difference with how the approach is happening. Right now, the American people, no matter where you are, you understand the state of your health care, the costs that you're seeing and the lack of choice that you've now been presented with. And in many cases, you realize that when you're going to see the doctor or loved ones going to see a doctor, that they're not either able to get in, they're not taking the Medicare or the exchange insurance that they got. The costs are going out of control. And I think it's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that Dr. Price mentioned that is so apropos of this is having a card does not mean you have insurance. It's like handing someone a blank check. It doesn't mean that you have money. It means you have a check. And I think what we've seen over the last few years with Obamacare is you can have an insurance card, but that doesn't mean someone's going to take it. And it sure doesn't mean that it's going to be affordable. And there's a big difference between having a card and having health care that's affordable. And that's the difference that we're trying to solve right now. And I think, so when it comes to communication, I think one of the things that's really helpful is that part of the sell is done for us. The American people understand the state of their health care. They understand how much they're paying for. They've gone to see a doctor or gone to a hospital or had a notice from their carrier saying, we are no longer part of this. Or their employer says, hey, whatever your particular carrier is, is no longer available. We're switching you into this. And so for so many Americans, healthcare is a very, very real part of their daily experience because they're caring for themselves or dealing with an ailment or dealing with children or a loved one or someone else in their family, where they're seeing firsthand the devastation and disaster that Obamacare has caused them in their personal life. So I think there's a welcoming of this effort, and I think it's a lot easier for us to go in because we don't have to explain the problem. People are living it. And I think for them to understand what we're giving you is more choice, greater competition. We're incentivizing more people to be part of the process, and we're going to be driving down costless premium. You had a second.
My second question on communications has to do with the president's assertion about the wiretapping.
Yeah.
Because the White House wants this now to be handled by the legislative branch and in confidence and classification, can we count on the president to himself while this investigation is going on to cease and desist using Twitter or any other public venue to make accusations that are in public but he will not respond to in public?
With respect to this particular situation, I'll ask that and I'll get back to you on that. John Gizzi.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Just getting back to the question about if one likes his or her health care, they can keep it. In 2013, Congressman Fred Upton, then chairman of the House Energy Committee, offered a legislation that put precisely those words into law, and it received the votes of every Republican member in the House and between 40 and 50 Democrats, and then it died in the Senate. Would the administration support a revival of the Upton Amendment? In other words, putting the right to keep one's health care plan and doctor, if he or she liked it, today?
I mean, I think that's the goal. I don't want to start talking about what we're going to, as we go through the process. We've now put our stamp on this and sent it to the House. It'll work its will as amendments come up through regular order. Our team will weigh in on those. With their staff, and again, the president's meeting with the whip team today. I don't want to start saying we're going to support this amendment or that amendment now, but I think generally speaking, obviously the goal is to make sure that people get a plan that they like, that's affordable, that meets what they need to have met. that they shouldn't have to have a one-size-fits-all government instilled healthcare system that doesn't offer any choice or frankly isn't tailored to the needs that they have. I think that's an important thing. John.
Sean, right now you're 2 votes short of passing repeal and replace in the Senate because you've got 4 Republican senators who are saying they can't support the bill because of rolling back the Medicaid expansion. What do you say to those senators who are very concerned that people will lose coverage, that this does not provide enough stability for those people who rely on Medicaid for their health care?
Well, there's 2 things, John. One is we're at day 1. We're going to go through the House first, so we got a little bit of time. And I think as we go through that process, these senators, and not just the additional 2, but I think and hope that we'll get additional ones that recognize that those people, as I've said over and over again here, it's if we do nothing, they're going to be in a very, very worse scenario than they are now. More and more people, if you're on Medicaid, which serves so many low-income Americans, as I mentioned, they have a card. And that card does not allow them to go to doctor after doctor or saying, we're not going to take Medicaid or TRICARE anymore. So I would ask those senators, what are you doing to help us work on a bill that will get them insured again? Because for too many Americans, they've got a card, but they don't have insurance. And I think that's a very, very big thing, to a distinction to make. They're the ones who have the problem right now. They've got a Medicaid card and nowhere to go. And what we need to do is to make sure that low-income Americans, veterans, small business owners, individuals who desperately need health care have options and affordability.
And one other piece of this. You can bring down the cost of the insurance itself through new efficiencies in the system selling across state lines, but the biggest driver of the increase in health insurance cost is the skyrocketing cost of medicine.
Right.
What in this overall plan do you propose to do to either cap the rise or even bring it down?
Well, I think Secretary mentioned this, but I mean the cost of prescription drugs is no, it's not. It's a big factor. I think that.
But when you're paying $50,000 out of pocket to get a stent.
Right,
I mean,
but again, what is the biggest thing missing?
But it's getting out of control. So
fair enough. But
fair enough. Drugs is one part of it.
No,
but
okay. When you talk about procedures or drugs, the biggest thing that's missing in this whole equation is competition. There's no. I mean, we're down to one plan. In many places, there's nothing for these places to compete.
There's competition between hospitals.
No, there's. I mean, that's fine. But if they know they're going to get the same reimbursement rate, if they know that there's no other options, that plans aren't trying to get people, then that's a big difference. Right now, there's a lack of competition in the industry, and I think one of the presidents. I get it may be one part of that. But you're right, that all over medicine, procedures and such, but there's a reason he met with drug executives and talked about getting those costs down. That there's a multifaceted approach, and how do we instill competition, how do we drive down costs? But you're right, we've got to do more to get the cost of that down, of the procedures, to allow additional options. Everything that, it's the same way that, again, think about your insurance, right? One of the things that was driving up costs in the past was people were exercising the option of going to an emergency room over and over again for their primary care. And what happened is that you saw all of these, quote-unquote clinics, insurance carriers actually made it cheaper in terms of co-pays to go see that than an emergency room, driving people to somewhere that didn't continue to drive up costs, clog insurance. That competition alone starts saving the plans money and helping to keep costs down. We've got to instill more aspects of competition in medicine. Jennifer.
Can you give us an update on the effort to roll back regulations? Have the regulatory reform task forces identified any regulations to roll back, and have any actually been repealed?
I think that they have had their work cut out for them. They've started. As the president has met with different industries and companies, corporations, associations, that is a constant subject of discussion, which is those regulatory aspects of our economy that are keeping companies from growing, expanding, and hiring. And so I know that the domestic policy team and others have been working on that. And if I can get further updates on specific legislation, or excuse me, specific regulatory action, I'll get back to you. Hallie.
Thank you, John. 2 topics for you. And one, just bear with me. I'm trying to get some clarity on something that my colleagues have tried to follow up on as well. You've said that the president stands by his tweets Saturday morning. That President Obama ordered this wiretap. You've also said that the administration wants Congress, and let me just be clear, he said he found out this information. You've also said that the president wants Congress to investigate. Some members of Congress, by the way, have asked the White House and asked the president to come forward with that information. So bottom line, why would the president want Congress to investigate for information he already has?
I think there's a separation of powers aspect here, as I mentioned to Jonathan, that we think it's...
Talk about resources and time. Why waste that?
Well, it's not a question of waste it. It's a question of appropriateness.
But if the president has the info, and I guess that's what I'm trying to get to, if he's sitting on this information that he found out, he's now directing or asking or recommending that the intelligence committees look into this. And you talked about they have resources and staff, which they do.
Right.
But why expend those resources and staff if the president found out this information and hasn't?
I think there's a difference between directing the Department of Justice, which may be involved in an ongoing investigation, and asking Congress as a separate body to look into something and add credibility to the look adds an element that wouldn't necessarily be there if we were directing the Department of Justice, for example. But again, I think we've made it very clear how he wants this done and where we go from there. So,
second question then. Millions of Americans are working on their tax returns right now. Will the president commit to releasing his tax returns for this year, and is he still under audit for his past returns?
my understanding is he's still under audit, and I'll follow up on the question. Yeah.
Question and quick follow-up. How do you react? How do you understand what we've seen on the growing number of cases at the Canadian border of Canadians born and raised in Canada with valid passport being stopped at the border and told just to go back? They won't let come in the U.S.
I'm not aware of that. I think that's something that probably should be addressed to the Department of Homeland Security.
There might be a misunderstanding of the messages sent.
I don't know, and I think it's a good question that is probably best directed towards the Department of Homeland Security. Dr. Swan.
Thank you. Is the White House going to keep its promise to withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement? And our understanding is that there's some divisions of opinion. Rex Tillerson wants to stay in. Steve Bannon wants to get out. What's going on? Will you keep the promise? If not, why not?
Yeah, I think that's something I'd be glad to follow up with you and everyone. I don't have anything on that right now. I'm aware of the discussion of it, so let me, if I can, I'll get back to you. Mike.
I had an unrelated question, but I also want to follow up on something that Alexis...
Unrelated questions are my favorite.
had asked. She talked about the communications strategy. Will the president play a public role in selling this bill? Will he speak to the public about it? Will he answer questions about it?
That's a good question. I think that we are going to have a very comprehensive strategy. As I mentioned, just a few minutes from now, the president is going to engage with members of the House whip team to talk to them. I understand that, but I know, and I understand that this is step one, Mike. There's a lot of time. As I mentioned, we expect to be dealing with this for the next several weeks. There'll be plenty of opportunities for the president to speak about that, to engage with the public, but it's going to be a comprehensive plan that we will discuss. We had, I can't even begin to tell you how many administration folks, members of Congress, flooding the broadcast and radio airwaves today, both nationally and in local markets. We were very, very active throughout the country, getting out the word on what we're doing and why we're doing it, from national broadcast shows to cable to TV, to radio. We had a very, very aggressive start to this effort. We're working with the House in particular. We'll continue to start really engaging with the Senate. But this is going to be a comprehensive effort, working with the House and the Senate to get this thing done, and other partners, doctors and outside groups that share this concern. As I mentioned earlier to one of the other folks, that there is there's a need by companies and corporations who are feeling the weight of additional costs to join us in this effort. And I just want to, this is obviously something that needs to get dealt with. The escalating costs are having a significant impact, not just on our economy, but on the ability of people to get hired. Or frankly, people who are hired lose their job because the cost of health care is not allowing, especially people in the small and medium-sized businesses, to keep up with those costs. With that, thank you guys very much. I look forward to seeing you.
Sean, I had a meeting tomorrow. Congressman Cummings is meeting with the president.
We'll have a readout for you.
Sean, I had that unrelated question, which was...
I'm sorry. That's not fair. Mike gets his unrelated question.
Will the Trump administration continue the Obama administration's practice of releasing publicly the visitor?
We're currently evaluating our our procedures in that, and we'll have some, when we have an announcement, I'll let you know. In April, I'll have a readout on our schedule for tomorrow later. I will have, and once it's confirmed, I will let you know first, and then everybody else. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Okay, so that wraps up, I think what is fair to say was an epic Sean Spicer briefing. At the top, he had the HHS Secretary, Tom Price. We want to unpack a lot of what we heard here in the very first official White House briefing that we've had in about a week, a little more than a week. With me now, here on the panel, CNN senior political reporter Nia Malika Henderson, our chief political analyst, Gloria Borger, and Jeff Mason, who is the White House correspondent for Reuters, and CNN's David Chalian, our political director, will be here in a moment. Let's start with wiretapping, because watching the kind of way that Sean Spicer had to turn himself into, I don't know how many different forms of a pretzel to answer without answering the real deal, which is that the president put him in a really, really tough position, put everybody in a very tough position by making the accusation that he did at whatever, 6 o'clock in the morning over the weekend, saying that President Obama wiretapped Trump Tower. I want to play for you one of the early exchanges on this.
Yeah, I addressed this multiple times yesterday. I think the president, we put out a statement on Sunday saying that we would have no further comment, and we were asking the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees to look into this concern and report back.
Can't the president just ask the FBI director?
Well, I think
Has he asked him?
No, the president has not, and I think that we've gone back and forth with you guys. I think there is clearly a role that Congress can play in its oversight capabilities. They've made it very clear that they have the staff, the resources, and the process. I think that's the appropriate place for this to handle. I think if we were to start to get involved, you would then write stories about how we were getting involved. So it's a no-win situation. I think the smartest and most deliberative way to address this situation is ask the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, who are already in the process of looking into this, to look into this and other leaks of classified information.
Do you believe that President Obama ordered something like that?
I get that that's a cute question to ask. My job is to represent the president and to talk about what he's doing and what he wants. And he has made very clear what his goal is, what he would like to have happen. And so I'll leave it at that. I think we've tried to play this game before. I'm not here to speak for myself. I'm here to speak for the President of the United States and our government.
So before I get to my panel, I want to talk about that. I want to bring in Jim Acosta, who was in the briefing room for this rather lengthy briefing. I think the most true statement, Jim, that we heard from Sean Spicer there was that he's in a no-win situation. That is
sure
true.
Seems that way.
Yes,
yeah.
But the reality is, let's just exactly another fact check that maybe is not true or is TBD is that when he said no, the president hasn't asked the FBI and the FBI director to sort of make this public.
Right.
The answer was no. The president, does have the authority to do that. He just hasn't.
He sure does, but then Sean Spicer made the point during the briefing that if the president were to intervene, were to get involved and ask the FBI director or go to the director of national intelligence or go to the FISA court, or do whatever he might possibly be able to do through his powers of the presidency, then Sean Spicer was saying, well, then we in the news media, their adversaries up on Capitol Hill would accuse the president of improperly getting involved in an investigation, and to some extent they do have a point on that. But as you heard during the briefing, I tried to press Sean Spicer on this point. Do they have any new information, any new evidence, any new proof of the president's accusation that President Obama somehow bugged or wiretapped through some kind of action through the Justice Department over at Trump Tower? He just did not have any new information, no new proof to suggest that. And I also asked whether or not the president regretted ever bringing up this accusation. He said no, he didn't. And so they are very much where they were yesterday. This is, I think, going to start having a Groundhog Day type of quality to it, Dana, where we're asking this question every day. This may explain why we haven't had a whole lot of on-camera briefings in the last week or so. This is the first one we've had in a week, although he did take some questions from reporters on camera yesterday. That any time he walks out here, this question is very likely going to be asked. Now, keep in mind, this happened at the very end of this briefing. The very start of the briefing, as you noticed, was the Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price advocating in many ways for the Republican health care plan that has been put forward up on Capitol Hill. You even saw the two props that we had next to the podium here, where they were talking about the size of the Democratic bill that was passed and signed into law, aka Obamacare, and the Republican proposal trying to make the case that in this case smaller is better. But they try to talk through that as much as possible, and only at the very tail end of this briefing could we get into some of these Russia and wiretapping questions, and they are still standing firm, Dana, that the president did not make any mistakes, has no regrets, and they're hoping that these congressional panels can investigate this.
All right, Jim Acosta, thank you so much for that. I want to